Di Maria, Lionel Messi, Messi's hitting. Oh! That's what they came for!
This could be the most dramatic story of the season. It's Torres to give Chelsea a place in the Champions League final.
Hello, mate. You all right?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good, mate. It's nice to see you again for the second time this week. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, always a pleasure seeing you too, bud.
Good, mate. Especially when in between the last time we spoke, we've had some good news in between, which is really positive.
Good news. I'm just trying to remember.
You shared it
oh,
yesterday, mate. You shared it yesterday.
oh, yeah, yesterday was good news. Yeah, definitely. That's a good start, isn't it? Sorry.
No, it's fine, mate. I think that's definitely a good one in between. So it's nice to start off with some positives and to take that away, which is a really nice in between the conversation we had last week and this week. So good news.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Luca. You know, very much so. I feel so.
Absolutely. Well, it's good that you're smiling. It's good that we're here on a Thursday night and we're able to make this happen. And especially as in between, we've been chatting about setting up a couple more episodes. One to do with the Unsung Hero series, where it's going to be a little bit of a tailored episode with you, and then another episode of the the Reflective Circle series. So definitely good to be producing content and planning for the future weeks as well, mate. So it's really, really nice.
Sounds really exciting, and I'm sure you got it all in hand, my friend.
Absolutely. Well, it's all good, and I'm glad that you're part of it and co-hosting this series with me, which is something which I've been looking forward to ever since we recorded last week's first episode, mate.
Yeah, it's a huge honour to be doing this with you as well, mate.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure. And do you know what? The delay we have from Tuesday night to tonight, though, the amount of different things which have happened in football has only added even more content for this episode. So I'm looking forward to it, and it's ended up working out in a good position all round.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I think that's the thing with football is that you think, oh, it's going to calm down now, and then yeah, just so many more things get added that you think, blimey, where did that come from? That was unexpected.
Ah, I know. Tell me about it. So, since we last spoken, we've had the end of the Premier League season, whereby the money that we both put on the different teams to win the title ended up going in City's favour. So I think that's the real talking point since last week, just to build up and wrap up from our points last week. When City went on to win their fourth consecutive title, do you think that's a bigger win than United's three in a row?
Absolutely. I think it's a don't get me wrong, Sir Alex had a great legacy and tradition with United. Um, but I think this just goes to show with Pep's side, they just keep on going, don't they? I don't know how. Um, but for consistency at this level of football is insane, and that's got to be given. There's got to be a lot of praise given to Pep for that.
And I absolutely agree with you because, especially from the work that he's done, to win it four in a row is very tough, sort of, a thing to do, and it's the first time it's ever been achieved by anyone. So that's never going to be taken away from him in his own right, and he's deservedly so. And it only shows when he's arrived to the Premier League. A lot of people wrote him off, saying his style of play wouldn't sit well in the Premier League, in the adjustment that he's had to make in terms of building up that squad which he's had, and the amount of changes which he's made over the years, which have only been positive and influential. For when it comes down to it, then, though, do you think he is a more successful or better manager in terms of the Premier League achievements compared to Sir Alex Ferguson then at the current contrast?
Ooh. Um, I think personally, Pep's still got to get more European championships under his belt.
Mm.
Because I think even though he did get his first one with City last season, they always seem to come short when it comes to European competitions. So I think if he can master that, which I'm sure that's always ticking over in his mind,
Mm.
um, then I think he can be on par, if not better. But I think as well with what Sir Alex Ferguson did is, I mean, from what I can remember as well, is that he kept utilising that squad that he had, but he kept making changes to it every single season to keep it fresh. And with Pep, he does that in some degree, but then there's other players that have been there for a long time. Or I still feel that with Pep, in a respect though, when it comes to certain situations, to say it's coming to a cup final, I feel he overthinks it at times.
Mm.
Um, like it's like I was fearing when they went. Uh, at least I know it was early on Sunday when they scored against West Ham, but they still had to beat Spurs, of course, as well, a long way to get the trophy. But I was thinking, what's he going to do? Like, is he going to put Kovacic in over De Bruyne? Because that's the sort of thing he's done before. That he's tried to hold that. Instead of going for it, he's tried to rein back a bit at times. And I just think that's the only thing that with Pep's game that I've got to
And
be
I'm
a little bit critical of.
No, I think so, and it's good that we have that outlook and that consideration because, again, a lot of people have said he does overthink the combination of things sometimes, and when he has that rotation from something which has been successful, okay, we don't want to be, too competent in the way that we play because we can be found out in that sense. And if he has the amount of players to drop the capacity in and have that rotation, then he might catch the opposition on the hop. However, where he overchanges it from that consistency, he loses that consistency where he can bring that into play sometimes, and I think that's what's cost him one or two. But I think in the current context, though, I was listening to the overlap last night in the current episode, and they were talking about the same sort of question. And the argument from Jamie Carragher was that he feels that Pep Guardiola is more successful than Sir Alex Ferguson, and although Pep has, I believe, 6 titles, it's not the same as winning 13 Premier League titles. So yes, he's beat the points record. Yes, he's beat the record for a number in a row. Yes, he's been influential in terms of the way Premier League teams are playing, as well as other teams around the world. He's rebuilt squads. He's built upon the success of Pellegrini before him. He's taken City to the next level. He's brought youth players in. He's won them the Champions League. Yes, he's had a huge impact. But I think if we're looking at what success is in football and how to compare, the most successful ever manager in the Premier League and whether it's someone sitting top, how can you say someone sits top with 6 and then someone who sits second place with 13? Okay, yes, you could narrow down the years. You could have a bit of a data trail in another contrast. But I think how could you have someone second place with 13 compared to someone in 6? That doesn't sit as logical sense in any
Mm.
way, in sort of my way of thinking.
No, I totally agree with you. Um, yeah, no, 100% agree. I do feel that I don't know. I'm not denying that Pep's done being successful, you know. Um, but I still think when I say there's still a long way to go, this is it though. Is I think Pep always plays it as well that each season, come the end of the season, he doesn't know what he's going to do next.
Mm.
He can't commit to that. I mean, Sir Alex was there for a very long time at United, and let's face it, it is very rare for uh managed to stay as long as Sir Alex does now at a football club of any level, really. Um, but with Pep, I think what will what will it be that makes him tick and say enough is enough now? Will it be that when he's done for quadruple one season?
Mm. I think it's definitely interesting, especially as what I said the other day to someone else is I think he has spoken about leaving this year or at the end of 2025. And he said he feels that he's more closer to leaving than staying. So just in my mind, when you look at the managers which could take over from him, there's two sort of standout managers primarily in the Premier League who are both Spanish, both build upon his way of playing, who are both accessible to City, both have had achievements in their own sort of perspective so far. One more than the other. One is still developing and could be a future aspect or consideration. But if I'm narrowing down just the Premier League candidates, then I think it would be Unai Emery and Mikel Arteta. Now, they're both Spanish managers. One is coached at City before and knows what Pep Guardiola is all about. He's also coming from Arsenal, a team which is competing for Premier League, as we know. However, if Arteta went from Arsenal to City, would he be deemed as unsuccessful at Arsenal? And therefore, would he fit the City way? Or would he actually have success at City? And then a lot of people would just be putting it down to, oh, that's because he has money compared to Arsenal. But then I think Unai is another perfect fit whereby he steps up from Villa. It's a natural progression from him. He's been very successful at PSG. He's been successful at Seville. He built a very good Villarreal squad. He's doing well at Aston Villa. He's proven in Europe. So if he builds upon what Guardiola's done with City, then he makes a lot of logical sense, especially for the first time having real money available to him. And he seems to be a natural progression for City, especially when Aston Villa could cash in on the contract which they've narrowed Unai Emery down to. So I think it's going to be a very interesting season as next season comes. But whether Unai Emery stays at Villa for another year and goes, you know what, I've had 3.5 years or 2.5 or 3 years at Aston Villa now, I want to move on, or whether he wants to build something there. I think next season is going to be a very interesting time again when it comes into these considerations where we're currently at now. And the whole purpose of this episode is the manager merry-go-round, because there's been a lot of transfers amongst managers at the moment, which are interesting. So would you say that Guardiola's staying at the end of next year, or do you think he is going to stay until that quadruple is won?
Because Pep's a serial winner, it wouldn't surprise me if he would want to push for that quadruple. But again, I suppose how long is a piece of string?
Yeah.
So it could go on for another 5 years. I mean, to be fair, this was City even. It's the longest time he's been at the club, isn't it? So I think now Klopp's left Liverpool, it might pave the way for Pep to say enough is enough now. But I think for two candidates that you've mentioned with Mikel Arteta and Unai Emery are good shouts. And but I think the thing is would Arteta, if Arsenal was to have another season like they have had this season, would Arteta want to jump ship from Arsenal, what he's built with foundations there? He has got City in his heart as well, as you say, because he used to work with Pep. But would he leave Arsenal? That's the question.
I don't think Arteta. I don't think thinking about it, I don't think Arteta would leave Arsenal for City straight away, especially when it's still a short space of time that Arteta has been there. And I don't think he'd leave until he's actually won a Premier League. So a lot of people could say, do you know what, it took 5 or 6 years for him to win one if he does go on to win one. But I think he wants to really build upon those foundations, as you say, and actually leave Arsenal with one, so he can actually add, an FA Cup, a Premier League, show that he's been a successful manager, especially at the transition from coach to manager and player to manager as well, that he's gone back to Arsenal and achieved something. And then a lot of people can argue, actually, it took a long period of time, but then it's also taking time for Jurgen Klopp to go on and win that Premier League with Liverpool. And it's about instilling those foundations. So when Klopp left on Sunday, as we saw, there was a lot of huge respect for him. There was a lot of happiness. So therefore, with Arteta leaving the same way at some point, and if it would be to leave, then I don't think it's going to be for City as his next job. I think it's either going to be the Spanish national team or perhaps Barcelona in a few years' time. So he can go there, emulate what he's done again as a player, go back to a former club, and then there's sort of that natural progression and roundabout whereby if he goes to Barcelona and has success, then City could come knocking in a few years if they're still up and challenging with those financial opportunities which they currently have. So I think it's going to be an interesting season. I think whoever the next manager is for City is going to be interesting. But again, if we go back to Guardiola, if he leaves City, where does he go next?
That's the question. Would he dab into international management? I'm not sure, because he's a very hands-on fella, is Pep. And I think he wants to keep in club management as long as he can. I mean, realistically, which I'm sure we'll talk about Pochettino in a bit, maybe. I don't know.
Absolutely, we
But
will, mate.
I feel it's the same that with that it's the same with Poch being linked with the England job, and it'd be the same with Pep. I don't think if realistically would Pep become the England national manager? Obviously, it'd be nice, but I can't see it happening. The only one is for Spanish national team, like you said with Arteta. But anywhere else, I mean, Bayern again. That's another topic, I'm sure. But all these other clubs. I mean, the only one team that I can think that's without a manager at the moment is Juve.
I'm with you there. I've
Um,
said Juve for a period of time. I think Italy is a interesting destination. Whether he can go there and break down, the norms of defensive football and go, do you know what, I've won it in Italy as well now. And then in a few years he goes into national management, or whether he goes back to Barca. But for me, the only natural sort of club next would be a Juve, and whether that's not this year, but next year, I think it is a consideration. And I don't think he'd go to PSG because he would seem to be a fraud there, as people say, because of the money links again. And because I don't think they've got the stature really at the moment in terms of that history there. So I think if he went to Juve and broke those defensive norms which they see, I think that's a natural progression step, because I don't think he go back to Barca yet. Again, I don't think he would go to international management, and people say the same about Mourinho. Mourinho still doesn't want national management because it's too soon, I believe. So therefore, I think Pep's in the same sort of boat, and I think he's got a lot to offer, again, hands-on at club level before he even steps up to national management. So I think it's interesting, but I'm completely on the same page with you, as you say with Juve there.
yeah, and I mean, to be fair, I mean, you saw that interview with Klopp when he said that he was going to step down at the end of the season, and he said, "I I feel drained. I've just got no more energy." To be honest, I felt like I saw more energy in Klopp this season than I did with Pep. I felt Pep looked absolutely drained physically and mentally.
Yeah, I think that's the point. I think, he had that sabbatical when he left Barca and went to um, Bayern Munich, but then obviously he's had that 8-year period coming up to 9 years now with City if he completes next year. And I think he will have some time out before we see him return, just a refresh, rejuvenate, and then to come back and have the options in front of him. So definitely going to be interesting. But if we just wrap up the Premier League table then, so this is how it finished. At the end of the year. So City beating Arsenal by 2 points at that top of the table with only 2 less losses. They scored more, but they conceded more. So it just shows how strong Arsenal were there with a joint on goal difference. Liverpool finished third, Villa fourth, your Spurs at fifth, sixth for Chelsea, which again, we're going to bring up Pochettino in a bit. And as to whether that is a good comeback and rebuild, especially when they were sat towards 10 and 11th and going back up the sixth, how the squad were playing, positive goal difference, 3 points off fifth place, 5 points off fourth place as well. And obviously, as we know, between Villa and Liverpool there is that big 14 gap point difference. So, even if we got up to fourth, we would then have to push even more to try and get up there and contend with the top 3. But when you look at the work which has been done by some of the other managers, Newcastle, I would say not a bad position for them, not where they want to be, but where they should be challenging, especially with the clubs around them. United obviously trying to come back and rebuild, and again, they're looking at their structure for next year, as we discussed a bit last week. West Ham United, who have just appointed Lopetegui earlier today, sacking David Moyes in 9th position, 10th with Oliver Glasner, and how he came in and turned things around after Hodgson. And I think 10th is a solid place for where they finished. Not bad for Brighton. They've dropped off from last year, but they've also got a managerial change again, which is going to crop up as one of our next topics. But I think that's surely where they should be, around there. Bournemouth with Areola, I think they've done really well to finish 12th, especially with the start they sort of had. Fulham with Marco Silva, I think that's an average position for them. Same for Wolves with Gary O'Neill. 15th, and Sean Dyche, especially after the points deduction, has had a very strong season, I believe. And, if they can push up for a few more places, I think that's where they should be contending. Not bad for Brentford. I think this is realistically where they should be, between 10th and 16th. But they need to try and build on next year. And again, Thomas Frank is going to come up in a little bit in another discussion. Nottingham Forest have just about survived by 6 points, especially after a bit of a shaky few weeks. And as discussed in last week's episode, why they've had some parameters surrounding them and what they've done with Nuno. So it's going to be interesting to see where he finishes with them next year. And then we've seen Luton Town, Burnley, and Sheffield United all relegated. So one of the talking points is going to be Burnley's Vincent Kompany and the work that he has sort of done. So it's been a very interesting Premier League table. But as we sort of move on then, did this decision and this move surprise you when we saw it last week? So it is De Zerbi. He left Brighton and Hove Albion, and he left after the final game against United. Obviously, there were wobbles in the last few weeks around Brighton and him sort of declaring interest in the Liverpool job, and then he said he was on board with what Brighton were doing and said he loved the club, and then suddenly they came out and said he was leaving. Did this surprise you when this came into play, Jord?
Not really. I felt for a while that Brighton have been, well, they have been slipping away as it's shown in the league table, isn't it? Because the league table doesn't lie. But I just think De Zerbi's head's been swayed somewhat along the way. I don't think his full attention was given to Brighton fully. Um, I don't think it's really surprising, but I mean, I just find it remarkable, which again will come around with company, I'm sure, but how you finished, like I suppose, below top half of the Premiership table with, say, a Brighton. And I'm not saying that's probably a good achievement itself, considering they had Europa. But then to be linked with all these top jobs, it just is like it. If that was a support, if that was that De Zerbi was linked with Spurs because Ange was moving on, I would be, I'd be a bit wary of that because as well another thing that I've felt with De Zerbi as well, even for supporters' sake, Lovey said that he had that comment with that he loved Brighton and everything like that. There was no like ruling out that position of that I'm staying, I'm here, I'm committed, and I've got a contract here. I don't know if that's just me looking on it thinking, well, that's what that's what people want to see. But even if he come out and said that, it might put a bit more ease with supporters' fears and maybe for players' minds even to focus on finishing the season strongly.
And I think that's what it comes down to is trying to finish that season strongly. But I think it didn't end up coming out of the blue in terms of I was sort of taken back by it in a way because I was like, do you know what? I actually thought he might have gone on for at least till Christmas, and then we might have seen him go in that January period, as we do see with some managers. But it's come a little bit sooner than I expected. But he's now been linked with a series of jobs. So he's been linked with the Chelsea job recently. He's been linked with the Juventus job, which is coming up. And this is a surprising one, which I saw the other day, and I thought it'd be interesting to include tonight. But he did say he's going to have some time out, but it'd be interesting to see whether he's true to that or whether he's going to come straight back into the merry-go-round straight away and as to where we see him next year. But as a Chelsea fan, I personally hope we don't get De Zerbi. As much as I like him, I think he's a mid-table manager. I think he's another Pochettino, really. I don't think he's a world-class manager. I don't think he's at the top level to challenge for the Premier League. But one job which I was interested in seeing this be linked to was the Nottingham Forest job. So De Zerbi will leave Brighton, but he's been linked with Nottingham Forest, which I thought as a very, very strange tweet.
If I can say this, bloody hell, I did not expect that.
It's a strange one.
It is a strange one. I mean, again, like you say, being linked with like Chelsea, being linked with Juve, and then you get linked with Forest. That is an interesting shout. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think if it was Forest, he could take them to new heights and bring back some of the, I suppose, happy, successful nights. But yeah, that is a that is a shock. I think the most fitting club would be for him, though, would be out of a lot, would be Juventus because of his Italian background, and that's where he managed before coming to Brighton, wasn't it? Over in Italy.
Just before he was at Shakhtar Donetsk, out in Ukraine. So obviously, the issues out there forced him to resign. But just before that, yes, you were right. He did manage out in Italy. So, but the only thing that he won out in Italy was the Series C. But managers have to start somewhere. But he averages 41% win ratio across all of his clubs, with only 25 more wins than losses at the moment, and only having won the Ukrainian Super Cup as the other cup. So is he like a Sarri? So, Sarri hasn't been, managing all the highest level clubs. He done very well at Napoli, came to Chelsea and done very well. He went to Juve and won the league. Obviously, by Juve standards, they're very much like Bayern. Unless you're winning the league and dominating it, then they're not interested in keeping you as manager. So is he a bit like a Sarri, or do you think he just hasn't had the opportunity to get to these top level clubs yet?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, with Brighton, again, their funding would be different to a top end club like a Juve or a Chelsea, and it would be interesting to see how he does. I thought that when Brighton worked so hard to try and qualify for European football, I was actually quite disappointed how they performed in Europe. I thought they was going to do better than they was going to, really. Especially with the Amex crowd behind them and everything like that, and the buzz around the club. I just felt that they'd gone a bit flat. So yeah, he. I'm not saying he's not successful, but it's just what would be the right job for him as well. I mean, all these managers we've said at the moment, and you think realistically, where can they go? Because it goes back to that point, I suppose. But if you can't, I know this sounds daft, but even if you won a Carabao Cup with Brighton or an FA Cup with Brighton, you could say, well, that's a statement made then for him to go on to bigger, better things.
Mm.
But the only thing he really managed to achieve at Brighton was that European football for that season.
Mm. And I completely agree with you there. But one manager, which is sort of very much like a De Zerbi at the moment, you talk about going on to higher things, but someone who's been linked with the Juve job, who might be a competitor, is the current Thiago Motta, the current Bogner manager. So he's currently 135. He's lost 16, drawn 24 in the process, averaging a 47% win ratio. So he has managed Genoa and Spezia before that. He's only ever won manager of the month so far, but he's done very well with Bogner this year out in Italy, and he is a bit like a bit like a Lampard and a bit like Xavi Alonso when I say this, in a way that they're both managers who were at clubs who are doing well. So obviously Xavi Alonso at Bayer Leverkusen has had a lot of success so far, and has decided to turn down the Liverpool job and the Bayern Munich job and stay with Bayer Leverkusen. So it's going to be very interesting the success that he has next year and how that looks. But then I also say Lampard in terms of where he was at Derby and jumping to Chelsea. So both sort of managers who have good stability in between the clubs that they have. Yes, okay. Thiago Motta has managed two clubs before, compared to Xavi Alonso, where he stepped up to manage Bayern Leverkusen. But again, this is an opportunity for a manager to step up to Juve, to come across from another club in Italy who is proven that he can do well in the Serie A, and as to whether he can step up and challenge for that Serie A title and then compete with the success that the other manager's trying to have and what they're up to. So it is an interesting one where he's a bit like a Xavi Alonso, whether he's a bit like a Pirlo and is appointed too soon and too quickly, and whether he would have that success or not have that success as we saw with Pirlo, and as to whether these sort of decisions are going to happen. But it's interesting whether it's going to be De Zerbi, Thiago Motta, or whether it is going to be someone else. But this is another manager who's had a bit of an underrated season and has caught the headlines like Xavi Alonso. Yes, he hasn't won the league. Yes, okay, data doesn't present everything, but he has had a good season with Bogner. I think he's worth a shout out. But I think if he doesn't go to a team like Juve, I think then the likes of Brighton to replace their manager, or someone like a Forest trying to step up, like West Ham are trying to do a little bit with Lopetegui, then Thiago Motta would be a great manager to consider to come across to the Premier League. A bit like a Patrick Vieira as well, done well abroad, came into Crystal Palace. I felt he had done a good job. Yes, okay, the stats presented that he didn't do well in his last 10 games or whatever it was. But I think Thiago Motta would be a great shout for the Premier League and for a club like Brighton, for example.
Yeah, I think that's a very good shout. I think we're seeing a lot of players. Excuse me, we're seeing a lot of players that have come out from retirement and they've gone straight into management, and it's bravery from the board's front as well, of any football club's board, to they could use the route out of getting someone in that's had a bit of experience behind them, but they're trying to give these the opportunity to do so now, like these younger fellas that have just come out from for playing standards. So hopefully, well, it sets a good precedent, to put it that way, because I think what we've been saying before in football, you've got to take risks, and hopefully with most of these, as it's shown with company, I mean, going and again, we'll talk about him shortly, as you say, but to have that first management job with Burnley, Championship football, got them promoted pretty much straight back up. The Championship is probably one of the hardest leagues in the well, I say across Europe. I know that might sound a bit extreme, but for competitiveness in that division is quite vast. Because everyone, if you're someone like a Rotherham saying that's playing a Burnley, it's their cup final. Um, and that's not in a disrespectful way to Rotherham. It's just, they're getting used to playing that's a team that's just come down from the Premiership. So things like that, it's just, yeah, I think that would be a good fit for Brighton. But if they wasn't to go for someone that's in that ilk of a Motta or younger ilk, realistically, who could they get in that would match them on par with what Potter started, if you like? De Zerbi's carried through. They need to keep that sort of stability trend going forward, I suppose.
Yeah, and I completely agree, and I think it's about trying to take that forward because other teams are trying to compete in the Premier League, so they're trying to bring in managers, and someone who is just coming today is Julian Lopetegui. So just been appointed by West Ham, and they're trying to get up with the trends of competing with those Premier League teams. So obviously, your City, Chelsea, United, Arsenal, Spurs, and Chelsea, and then you obviously have Aston Villa who are competing now. So West Ham are looking at going, do you know what? Brighton had a good season last year. We need to go up and compete with them. Newcastle are trying to compete up there as well. Whether Crystal Palace try and push up there. And it's all these teams that are all competing, and that's why it's becoming ever more competitive. But I think ninth place for West Ham was a good year last year. But they brought in a manager who's managed Porto, Spain, Real Madrid, Seville, came in to obviously Wolves and saved them and done a good job there. Didn't stay with them and ended up leaving, but he was linked with Bayern Munich this year as well. He also linked to the Crystal Palace job. So it's definitely an interesting manager to sort of have in. I like Lopetegui. I think he's had success by what he's done at the national teams. He hasn't done a lot at club level. I think he was unfortunate to be sacked at Real Madrid in terms of how that went down and how that sort of happened when that appointment came into play. As you know, he got sacked by Spain very quickly at that time, but he went to Seville and he's done a very good job. But do you think he is a risk, or do you think he is that sort of manager to try and take them to the next level, as we discussed, like Brighton, about trying to up those standards and take them to the next level?
Yeah, I'll credit to Lopetegui for his job that he did with Wolves. Um, Again, I just feel that for him, maybe he could keep on pushing, getting West Ham into them European spots. But I think there's a thing that sort of runs parallel, is that when he left Wolves, he wasn't given assurances that he could go out and spend some money on some players. And I've got that same fear for him here at West Ham. Is I don't see, though I know West Ham have spent a lot more in for the last few recent windows. Don't get me wrong with Moyes, they've got to. history and tradition of recent years before that they wasn't spending out. So does that mean he's got to inherit the squad that he's got at the moment? And it's going to be quite a tough one, really, if there's going to be, because there's going to be clubs sniffing around Kudos, Paquetá, most likely. They're just a name. So that's part of his mission, I suppose, is to get them players on side as soon as possible to try and say like and push them to that next level. Because otherwise, then West Ham could be liable to sell them on for a fee, and then he's back to a rebuilding project. Which is that what he really wants?
Hmm. I think, again, does he want that rebuilding project? How does that sort of look? What does the future look like? How competitive is it going to be? And then all these other variables in terms of the costings which come into play, the transfer market, the players that come in. So when it comes to risk factors and looking at what the future looks like, I think as we sort of transition and move on to other managers and keep building upon whether managers are a successful appointment or as to whether they bring that stability and whether they're trying to push teams up towards being more challenging. Are you surprised by this one and some of the interest surrounding company? I know you just touched upon it before we discussed Lopetegui, but I see a lot of sense in this personally. I think he has a lot of potential. He managed at Anderlecht before, only 18 losses in 92 games, average 46% win ratio. He was the runner-up in the Belgium Cup. He then went to Burnley and won the Championship, and obviously come up to the Premier League and experienced a very tough Premier League for the first time. But he is managing Burnley. They don't have the biggest wage packet available, and he's done quite well considering, averaging 43% at Burnley, 43% overall in his career. But I see a lot of sense in this sort of manager and what company is doing, and I think it is tough for Bayern because when you go from likes of Nagelsmann, Carlo Ancelotti over the years, then you bring in Thomas Tuchel, and then go to company who's just been relegated, only won a championship and a Belgium Cup, and then they try and appoint him again. I think he's a bit like a Thiago Motta, not a lot of success behind him, but he could be ready to step up to the bigger club and prove himself, or he goes in and doesn't prove himself, gets sacked, and then ends up a bit like a Vieira, and then floats around some other clubs and sort of sees what he does with them over the next 2 years. But I think he's played a good style of football. Yes, he is very rigid to his principles, so I think he could fit in with a very good Bayern Munich squad. I think I was listening to Simon Jordan talk about, and he said he doesn't care what he's achieved as a player, it's what he's done as a manager. But I think if he was to go into a club like Bayern, I think his playing career brings in a lot of respect from the players to go, yes, we believe in him. Yes, look at what he's done so far as a manager. Let's take this to the next level. And now it's about proving himself as a manager. So I think this job at Bayern would ground him a little bit in terms of, yes, okay, his playing career won't be even considered for his future jobs in a variable dependent by some people. But I think he makes a lot of logical sense by Bayern. He's a bit of an underdog. I don't think, he's one of the world-class signings which they could have gone on and made. Again, Ten Hag has been linked with the Bayern job. I think he makes a lot of sense. He's gone out, had success out of Ajax. He's done okay at United. And I think for him to leave United and walk out before he's sacked to a very good Bayern Munich job would make a lot of sense. But I think Ten Hag would be successful at Bayern, but I think company can do a good job at Bayern. And as to whether he can step up and prove that. So what's your thoughts on Vincent Company at Bayern? Is it a big risk factor, or do you see any sense in it yourself?
Uh, I mean, it is. Uh, now I've heard your opinion on that. You spoke very well about it, and I didn't even consider it like that when I first heard the news. To be honest, I thought it was a real big shock, um, because I thought this is a different level of pressure for Vincent Company to deal with as such from being Burnley manager to now Bayern that's wanting to win things every single season and compete in every single cup that they're in. I remember when Company was linked with the Spurs job before Ange got appointed, and I have to say, I was a bit underwhelmed when he was linked with Spurs, purely for facts that I felt, well, we've been crying out that we wanted someone to come in and deliver trophies. All right, Ange hasn't done this season, but with Levy's sort of culture of not giving managers enough time, in inverted commas, I just didn't think that was a good fit. With Bayern's board, I'm not too sure. They might be a bit more versed in the sense of that they'll give him a bit more time. They'll give him a chance to find his feet a bit more. But yeah, it's certainly an interesting one, and I think as well because as you say, from his playing career, he's got to be given a lot of credit for because he was an absolute stalwart for City under Pep that pretty much performs week in week out. And I think it can't be underestimated that the amount of managers that he has learnt off of over the years from Pep, from was it Mancini? Was he there when Mancini that was there? He must have been. Um, this will build all his all round experience to take on the top job now, probably. Um, but I mean, even for Burnley, that probably gets their name out there on the map a lot more now too. That they've taken that risk on company, but now they can't stand in his way to block him from going for an opportunity like that. If that is, then it'd just be like, well, be like Football Manager on PC
I
sort of
agree, mate.
situation.
I agree, and it's a sort of similar situation with De Zerbi because Brighton asked you like, well, actually, as manager, you've declared interest in Liverpool job, and you're not really committed to us, and then therefore he's ended up leaving because Brighton go, well, actually, behind the scenes, we're not going to have this, and we're going to be the ones who are bigger than you rather than you be bigger than us, and look like we're trying to hold on to you before another club comes in. So I think they've stamped their authority on that one, and I think it's a similar situation at Burnley a little bit, whereby okay, yes, you're throwing your hat in the ring a little bit for the buying job, but how can you not when you've gone back to the championship and you've got that consideration to be one of the biggest clubs in the world that could project you to the highest levels and really put you up there as a manager if you want to be successful. So I think it's in a situation like Burnley, though, they're a little bit different because, again, they've got a big powerhouse coming in. How can any manager not want to go there, especially when they're coming out of the championship following a relegation? But even if Bayern turned around after an interview stage and said, you know what, he's not the manager for us. He didn't present well. We've gone with someone else. I don't think Burnley would stamp their foot down and go, do you know what, company, it's time to move on. I think they'd be very happy to keep him because of the success that he has had previously.
I totally agree. I think, sorry, I think um, with company, how I can think of it, and I hope I can get these words out that I'm trying to say, it's like he is a big fish in a small pond for Burnley, if that makes sense. But when it comes to Bayern, I just fear if he might be for small fish in a bigger pond, if you know what I mean. So if the other way around, because they've got much more expectations. Um, but yeah, I mean, it would be, I just, yeah, interesting. And if he got the chance to work with Harry Kane, fair play, you know.
I think that'll definitely be a good sort of managerial attacking experience to have, but great for him to have in that one. So whilst we've discussed a potential risk factor upon company moving out to Bayern and another managerial candidate, one that came up this week, which is probably the split Chelsea fans right down the middle. A few weeks ago, if you took an opportunity of sacking a Pochettino, from what I was reading on socials, a lot of people would have took it, but this has gone down very divided at the moment, and seems like I'm on the minority of this one. But this one from Chelsea. So earlier on in the day, it was that he was demanding more control over transfers, and then a couple of hours later, he ended up leaving by mutual consent. So Pochettino talked about leaving Chelsea. Thank you for the ownership group and the sporting directors for the opportunity. The club is now well positioned to move forward in the Premier League and Europe for years to come. Now, was this a surprise to you that he left already, or did this sort of have a little bit of feeling that it was coming and it just happened to be a little bit sooner than what could have been in maybe a month's time or so?
I think he walked before he was pushed. I think there was, from looking on it from the outside, not being a Chelsea supporter, but it seemed like there was tension between him and Todd Bowley anyway. There didn't seem to be any clarity regarding his future, Poch. I mean, he was coming out with for comments in press conferences, wasn't he? That he said, "I don't know if I'm going to be here or not." And even for Poch, that must feel, or anyone in that position, if you've not been given assurances about your future, it must make you think like, well, what's the point of me being here then? I'm trying to give my energy, devoted time to help you guys succeed, and I'm not getting them same vibes back. But I do think I think it. I definitely was shocked by the news, given Chelsea's upturning form. Considering you've got European football next season now, haven't you? Because you finished sixth. Um, I think the transformation in form from the Carabao Cup final, bar some results, were pretty good by and large. I mean, when you played us at Stamford Bridge, going back a little while ago, I thought you played really well against us that night. You was really organised. You was disciplined. Probably one of the most disciplined Chelsea performances against Spurs I've seen over 4 years. You know, and that works on both ways, really. It seemed a very controlled game, really. But Chelsea, there was moments there that I could honestly say that, though it was 2-0, wasn't it? I'm
Yeah.
just trying, yeah. It could have been 3, 4, 5 that night because you guys were really on it. Now watching a Pochettino side of that night, but it was bringing back times of how he was with Spurs. During the times when he had Dele Alli there and Harry Kane and Sonny and Ericsson, etc. and co. But again, where Chelsea go now, I don't know. I've heard that it's split the dressing room somewhat through the press. I mean, what's your thoughts on it being a Chelsea fan and the upturn and form? Do you think it's time to move on, or do you think he should have been given more time? Or
Um, when I saw the news Tuesday, I was elated. I've never been a fan of Pochettino. I don't really rate him as a manager. He done well at Spurs by taking them to Champions League, by finishing second, by playing a good squad, by building youth, getting Kane, Sonny, and Dele Alli performing, and a few of the other players. But was he a Chelsea manager? He was a bit like a Benitez. No, he wasn't. Is he a world class, successful top tier manager? No, I think he went into a PSG squad. Yes, every manager seems to have success with PSG at a national level,
mm,
but he's done less of a job at PSG compared to Unai Emery, compared to Thomas Tuchel. And then when you look at the job at Chelsea, I think I worked it out on average. He's had 10% less winning success than Tuchel at both PSG and Chelsea. If we were to look at a like for like, and look at a world class manager compared to a very good manager in Tuchel compared to Pochettino. So I was glad to see the back of him. I think it makes the right sense for us. I don't think he is that top tier manager compared to your Klopps, your Guardiolas. But even if Klopp has left now, I don't think he is going to really take us up to those heights to challenge for the Premier League. So personally, I'm personally very happy to see that one. But if I just pull up some of the candidates for the Chelsea job as we have this discussion, so Thomas Tuchel, I would take back in an absolute heartbeat. Hansi Flick, I absolutely would love him as manager, and he's on my list of managers. But there is news about him going to Barcelona, and that's going to be interesting whether he goes to Barca, especially if Xavi leaves. So that's going to be a very interesting one how that unfolds. We discussed the Zerbi, but I'd eliminate him from that list. Company's on a very long list, I believe, but I'd eliminate him from that. Thomas Frank, I like very much, but I wouldn't take him at Chelsea. I just don't think he suits us and fits us yet. And I think he has to prove himself a little bit more with Brentford. Kieran McKenna, a very young manager who's come up from Brighton, who has been linked with the United job, Chelsea job already. and has come up with Ipswich, sorry, and has been linked to Brighton, Chelsea, and United. I don't think I think again this is a bit like a Lampard stepping up from a Derby to a Chelsea, stepping up from an Ipswich to a United or Chelsea is very quick for him. I think if he had one season with Ipswich and then went off to Brighton, or if he goes straight to Brighton now and then in a few years he was still linked with Chelsea or United, I think that he has to stay grounded like Xabi Alonso has done and go, do you know what, I'm not going to go to Chelsea or United yet. It's too soon. And then we've got Michelle and Homeby, who have both been linked with the job. But if I had to look at those candidates there, it'd be Thomas Tuchel, Hansi Flick, and Ruben Amorim for me, who would be the next Chelsea manager. Ruben Amorim has been a very successful manager. He's only managed out in Sporting. So again, is he a bit like a Mourinho or a bit like a AVB? Whether he come and be like Mourinho and have success, or whether he be like AVB and not have that success, again, only proven that club level over in Portugal, but only 35 losses in 253 games, 72% win ratio, over 300 goal difference. He's won the league twice. He's won 4 cups. He's won manager of the month several times, manager of the season. For me, he is an absolute standout candidate linked with the Liverpool job, but I think he suits us. I think he's got that class about him. He's got that ooze. And I would take him in an absolute heartbeat. If Thomas Frank is a good manager, you look at it, he's got 42% win ratio with Brentford. He's been there now at 6 years with Brentford. Good stability. He's come up and proven that he can keep a squad up in the Premier League. He is a good manager, but when you look at some of his deeper history, he's only managed youth levels on Bromby. But sometimes, again, he is that sort of Vincent Company in a way where he doesn't have a lot of success behind him in terms of trophies, but he has proven himself a little bit more than Company, but sort of sits in that same category as to whether a big club comes in and he would prove himself at a big club, or whether, he'd be sort of similar to Nuno. Yes, okay, Spurs aren't your Cities, they aren't your Chelseas, they aren't your Arsenals and Uniteds, but Spurs went for a Nuno from a Wolves. So I think that sort of move would be same for us if we went for a Thomas Frank, because Nuno wasn't a Conte, he wasn't a Mourinho, but he went in, didn't last very long at Spurs. Would Thomas Frank be in that sort of same ship? So he wouldn't be one for me. But if we were to look at perhaps narrowing down, so here is Kieran McKenna likely to reject a new Ipswich deal. So it's going to be interesting whether he moves or whether he does stay. And he's just playing out his cards for a bigger, higher paid contract at the moment, especially if he gives himself security. If Ipswich don't have that security this year to stay up, or if he's going to get sacked, he gets a big payoff. But apparently Chelsea have narrowed it down to Thomas Frank, Kieran McKenna, and Enzo Maresca. And Enzo Maresca obviously worked the City with Pep Guardiola. This is only his second job. He's managed Parma, didn't have much success there. He's done well with Leicester to bring him up, and only 13 losses in 53 games, 68% win ratio. But a lot of questions were asked because he only just about won that championship title last year with Kieran McKenna, who's proven himself with back-to-back promotions, and has done a very good job at Ipswich. But again, Maresca is a risk factor. All three of these for Chelsea are risk factors, and whether they step up, again, I don't think I'd leave Leicester if I was Maresca. I think I'd try and prove myself. But these are the three that apparently have been narrowed down, and Chelsea are going to make their choice on manager by the end of next week. But if you're Todd Bowley right now, and these are your 9 candidates at the job, who are you looking at, Jord?
I think Thomas Tuchel, Thomas Tuchel, sorry. Thomas Tuchel, yeah. I think you can't deny that. Would he come back to Chelsea? Not sure. I think Amorim is right. I think would be a good fit for Chelsea. I mean, if it was between them three, though, Thomas Frank, Kieran McKenna, and Maresca, I don't know. I just feel like, again, it's like with Chelsea, we're saying, with the history of a football club, you want people that have won something in their careers. And I'm not denying, because Maresca has won for Championship, as you say, this season. But that's the Championship. As you say, it's a big step up. Same with Kieran McKenna. He didn't really spend, did he, last season to get Ipswich where they are from their League One squad. I'm not denying they've all done brilliant jobs in their own respect. But if you're classifying Kieran McKenna in there, which, as I say, nothing against what he's done because it's absolutely phenomenal. It's a great football story. And they're a pretty local club to me, only half an hour up the road. So it'd be great to see them in for top flight. But that's where I feel sorry for maybe someone like even Rob Edwards at Luton for what he achieved. With Luton saying, all right, yeah, they've gone down this season. But he got that Luton squad up from nothing like last season previous, He's young. He fits that McKenna build. I don't know. I just think sometimes it goes down to what reputations they've had in the game. And obviously it's not just their management, it's about their playing careers as such. I mean, Thomas Frank, yes, from what I can remember, he didn't play top flight football at all, did he? As far as I remember. Kieran McKenna, same boat, gone into coaching early. Maresca, I can't say. But I just think that Chelsea needs to go for someone like Almiron. Yes, he's won for league title over in Portugal, but it's still a trophy that is quite a competitive league over there when they've got for likes of Benfica, Braga, and co. Especially if with Sporting it's worked before. They've got a reputation of bringing managers through. It's shown with, Villas-Boas. Didn't he start at Sporting Lisbon?
I believe Villas-Boas started at Porto, if I'm correct. Off the top.
Porto, yeah. That's my bad.
No, it's fine, mate.
But I think that this is it. Got. It's a very awkward one, isn't it? Because I think they're obviously. Bottom line is they're obviously doing something right if they're being linked with these top profile jobs. So out of them three, who would you rather?
I really like Hansi Flick. I really like Amaram. I really like Thomas Tuchel. If you said Thomas Tuchel, I'd take him back in a heartbeat. I think if we were to take Flick out now because he's been linked heavily with the Barca job and took it between Amarim and Tuchel, I really, really like both managers. And I think we need to take a bit of a punt on Amarim. But I would take Tuchel back in a heartbeat because, okay, Hansi Flick, I think he needs another job to prove himself, and I think that's why he needs to get back into club level. But if we look at it, he averages 50% win ratio. Thomas Tuchel averages 57% win ratio. Thomas Tuchel has had 63% overall at Dortmund. He's had 75% at PSG, 6% at Chelsea, 61% at Bayern. I think these averages are very, very successful. Whereas if we look at Thomas Tuchel, Hansi Flick, 45% at Hoffenheim, 81%, at Bayern Munich, and 48% at Germany, averaging 50%. Thomas Tuchel again is 8% higher, 7% higher, than Hansi Flick. So those are percentages when we talk about in football being successful that actually really matter. So again, if we took out Hansi Flick and put in Thomas Tuchel v Amarin beats that on percentages. So if you're looking at it, then percentages, it goes to Amarin. If you look at success and titles, then it goes to Tuchel. But for me, if you said Tuchel, I'd be so elated to have him back. I never wanted to see the back of him. And I think when we sacked Tuchel and went to Pochettino, I think that is a huge downward cast in a manager that we sort of had from a serial world-class winner, a world-class manager, which I absolutely think Thomas Tuchel is a world-class manager. People have said he's had issues at every club, but when you look at his record on paper, he's had success pretty much everywhere that he's been with the top clubs. He's won Champions League, he's won the League One, he's won the Super Cup, World Cup, He's won the Bundesliga. He's won Manager of the Year. I think he's a world-class manager, and I think he's certainly up there. I think if Liverpool were to look at, before they appointed Arne Slot, I think he's a great shout. I think if United wanted a manager, he's a great shout. But for me, it'd be Thomas Tuchel, and then Amorim if that didn't work out, and for us in the future to look at. But it's definitely an interesting one in terms of how that approaches considerations for the future, and maybe something that might happen next year.
I think that's it as well. At least Thomas Tuchel knows what the Premiership is about. He knows the intensity of the league. He knows, the dynamics of how it all works and everything. So that could work in Chelsea's favour. Because if they're trying to get up there competing again, let's face it, Arne Slot with Liverpool will be in a transition period. I mean, Spurs are still in transition with Ange Postecoglou at the moment. I think the only two teams really at the moment I can see battling it out next season is again between City and Arsenal. Because if you've got to give these managers time, I don't think Arne Slot's going to come in straight away and be able to match what Klopp's done. Because of how he set the bar so high, Klopp.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same with Chelsea. If you're looking at it between Almiron and Tuchel, Almiron would be good. I think if you're willing to go through that transition period, like Liverpool with Slot, but if you want to try and get success in, I'd say, straight away in first season to be up there competing, you need to go for someone like Tuchel.
I completely agree. And just to touch on before we move on to Postecoglou, which you just brought up there, as one of our final topics of the night. I'm a huge fan of Kieran McKenna. I think he will be on a long list of future England managers. And I think he is one to watch. And I said this when he went into Ipswich, and some of the tweets which came out when he was appointed saying how you'd be very average for them. I've had a few comebacks in the last few weeks when they got promoted saying how wrong those initial fans were, because I did stick up for McKenna and say that. So I'm a huge McKenna fan, but I really don't want to see him at Chelsea. I think it's too early. I think it's too soon. I don't think he's the manager we need to sort of get the squad together. Tuchel is a no-nonsense, proven manager at the highest level who is really going to take Chelsea to that next level. But just touching upon Postecoglou here, I thought it was interesting in our Premier League wrap-up just in between last week and this week. It was his press conference after City when he talks about some of the concepts which he did.
But ours has revealed to me the foundations are fairly fragile, mate, so that's what I feel. I just think that's, like I said, the last 40 hours has revealed a fair bit to me, and that's all right. That just means I've got to go back to the drawing board with some things. Outside, inside, everywhere. It's been an interesting exercise. It's just my observations, mate. I'm not going to tell you because it's for me. I'm the one that's got to do it, so I'll probably misread the situation as to what I think is important in your endeavour to become a winning team, but that's okay. That's why I'm here. I'm just not interested, mate, and maybe, maybe I'm out of step, but I just don't care. I just want to win, and I want to be successful at this football club. That's why I was bought, so what other people, how they want to feel and what their priorities are of zero interest to me.
What do you think he's talking about there in that video, George, when he talks about, some of the issues which are surrounding Spurs, and he didn't realise the situation before he came in as he initially had thought about it?
I think it's the mentality within in and around the club. To be honest, I think it is a bit damning that he's come out and said something like that, and Conte said something the year previous to that. Conte didn't actually say it on the outside setting, which you can only assume is like supporters. But they've said with inside, and that's two managers that have said that now. Conte got the brunt of that and got sacked for it, for being too outspoken. With Ange, I'm not saying that he shouldn't have said what he said, because he was a man that was hurting that night, and I think he said in his press conference the day after, it was the worst game of football he's ever been involved with. And though we was talking about it last week with the City and Arsenal situation, I mean, let's face it, if we was not, just say we was ninth in the table or whatever, we lost that game because there was that foundation of wanting City to win the title more, then you would have had to have felt Ange because he could have been out of his job the next day. Um, so it was very unusual for him to come out and be outspoken like that to the press when he's known as a media darling. Um, so obviously something did bug him that night. I did see that. I don't know if you saw the video on social media that was circulating, but he had a pop at a fan in the ground last week. Um, and I think he just snapped in the end. I mean, the next day in that press conference, he said he's had time to think of it. And would he change things differently? Yes, he would. And I think he was accountable. It's what we were speaking about the other night, wasn't it? Really, Luke,
Yeah.
that being accountable on that, and fair play to Ange for what he said. It might not been easy, and it might be that he still feels that he just, there's still that snag in there that he just wants to win football games, even though he does see it a bit more on a fan's perspective now. But that's Ange as I've got to know from watching his press conferences regularly, from his whole demeanour, that's his values in him. That's his values of him, like his dad saying to him from what he said in his talks. You must never give in. Always fight until the very end. And I think that was a part of him that has been sort of snagged away and taken away from him on Thursday night because of that horrible situation, them values, through his upbringing and that. And I think it was a very hard situation, and I've hope for his sake, but not even just for his sake. If it's even another Spurs manager, or if it's another team that's involved in a title race like we was with rivals, I just hope that they don't have to go through that, because that must be a very, very horrible situation to be in.
I think it's interesting in terms of whether it's going to come out more in the next few weeks as to whether as to what these fragile components are and what they look like, and what players are going to be signed and how the next year looks. And I think it's going to put a little bit more pressure on Levy more than ever. I know we spoke about it last week about the control he has over Spurs. But if he goes through a Postecoglou where fans, I think, is still a little bit divided as to whether they're really behind him or as to whether they'd be happy if or wouldn't be bothered whether he left, kind of thing. At the moment, I think there's still a little bit of divide at the moment between that. But I think he's won the majority over, and I think that's only going to build next year, especially if they continue to have a good season and they continue to apply this mindset. And people see through, if they go on to lose Postecoglou, they've lost Conte, they've lost Mourinho, they've sacked Nuno. There's a lot of consideration in terms of the managers they've gone through, and just to look at, legends moving on, this sort of transition period, which we're seeing. There's a lot going on at different clubs. Varane leaving United, Royce leaving Dortmund, the England squad announcements, and who's been left out of that. And we're going to touch upon that over the next couple of weeks. These Premier League movements, the movements of managers into the Spanish leagues, who's come in, who's going out, the rumours which are circulating around different things. I think it's a very exciting time, I felt, this week, in terms of that. A lot has been happening, and in a lot of quick transition. As win over Klopp a few weeks ago, and taking them into the final, I think is a highlight for a wrap up there. And then one of the other final wrap ups is we did see, Jurgen Klopp leave Liverpool, but this man here, Pep Linders, who's just secured a big job now in terms of stepping up for a Red Bull team, and it's going to be interesting to see whether they perform. Whether he is actually another. Ralph Ragnick is soon to be seen. Whether we talk about managers coming from the Godfathers football, Maresca's come from Pep Guardiola, and Pep's had a few more, but they haven't all been successful. Jose's had a few managers under him, they've had some success, but not loads. So whether Pep Linders is now one of Klopp's is going to be interesting, especially with with what he has seen. But just to wrap up here from our Premier League wrap up and managerial merry-go-round, is Jurgen Klopp finishing with Liverpool and this incoming manager of Arne Slot. But I think it was a very touching tribute, which we saw with Jurgi, and I think he is a fantastic manager, and it'd be interesting to see what he does next, whether he comes back and manages the national team or whether he comes back in at club level of some capacity. But I don't think he'll go Bayern Munich because of his love and commitment and loyalty to clubs, especially with Dortmund. So I think he has a very different mindset compared to Tuchel. But I think the Germany job will be the last job we see Klopp take before he does retire. I don't think he'll retire yet, and he has discussed whether that is on the cards. But I think there is a little bit of a pull factor towards the German job before he finally does retire. But just to wrap up on then, would you put Jurgen Klopp in your top 5 managers all time of Premier League? And what does your top 5 Premier League managers list look like?
Ooh. Ooh. I think Jurgen Klopp is definitely in that top 5. He again, Liverpool was going through that hurt from losing out to the title with Brendan Rodgers days. And yeah, he came in and it was a bit like Ange Postecoglou in a sense. He was a breath of fresh air, Klopp. Um, his attitude with everything, with his football, like his principles, with his playing style, with just his whole attitude was absolutely first class. Honestly, it'd be interesting to see how he gets on there. To be fair, it's a lot of when I say it's a lot of pressure. This is where I suppose when we're football supporters, we can be a bit funny and a bit, can I say for word fickle? I suppose that we forget all for good times, and as soon as it goes all pear shaped, we're on for managers' backs or whatever. um, so with Klopp, I think it's going to be sad, and I think with Premier League it'll be a sad place without him. Where we go next, I don't know. Though I felt he was more energetic what he was saying this season, there's something just bugging in me that them words that he said in his interview of I can't say for now, but you will know in time, and I can only assume that that's health related because he just seems to have been a bit. I don't know. It's not a normal thing that you come out and say. I mean, yes, you say that you're tired, but then you can think of all sorts that goes around your head with that, with what he said. So, but that's me probably just overanalyzing it. I don't know. Germany job could be good for him. He wouldn't go Bayern or anything like that. He won't. He definitely won't be back in for Premiership.
Mm.
I think he's again very true to his principles in that he said that he won't. He won't do so, and I don't think he will either. So, but yeah, top 5, he's in there. It's not in order, but I'd say that Klopp's in there, Pep's in there, Mourinho's in there. You could say for his principles of, even though he wasn't one that won a lot, but he brought a legacy into the Premiership, and that was Arsene Wenger. He always liked to develop youth players as well.
Mm.
And he brought that legacy in for Arsenal. He consistently got them top 4 finishes. And just his methods were really good and innovative. Is that the right word? If I said it right?
Innovative.
Yes. So they're my 4, but the other one I'm not sure because Conte, good manager, but didn't cut it at Spurs. But you could say, was it because of the situation? But he did bring success to Chelsea. Um, that's a really tough one though for that other place. I mean, you might be able to throw names at me.
If I was to look at it, I think Sir Alex Ferguson sits top. I think second place is Pep Guardiola. I think third place then for me is Jose Mourinho for those back-to-back wins and coming back and winning another Premier League title, especially initially beating the record, setting that 9-year home run, the amount of goals he conceded in the season. I think then Klopp has to be up there for the inspiration towards Liverpool, what he's brought, especially since the commencement of the Premier League. I think what he's done in terms of just that little bit more reach. Yes, it is out in Europe and not Premier League, and we've looked at Premier League managers and their success, but I think Klopp has to be in the top five, and then I'm with you on Wenger there on that top five because that inspiration he had, the success, the back-to-back titles he also had, and being the only manager to maintain a gold Premier League trophy and have an undefeated season in the Premier League is an incredible achievement. And I, as much as other managers might push on and maybe edge Wenger out over that period of time if they go on and have that success and Wenger drops, I think Wenger will always sit in the top 10 somewhere because of that achievement alone, especially that longevity he had. But they're my top five. And it'd be interesting to see whether the likes of Conte would come back. And I think he could be a manager who could come back and potentially push for these sort of places. But definitely interesting times. I think Roberto Mancini is perhaps top 10 if we extended the list a little bit. But I think he'll never come back to the Premier League now, or if he does, it won't be for a top job. I think many years ago, I would have loved him to have come to Chelsea at some point. But I think in terms of going from a national team now and stepping and literally leaving the Italian national team for a Saudi national team, I think it's about money now for him. A bit like when Marcello Lippi or Marcelo Lippi retired or left the Italian teams and ended up in China. That's a similar sort of situation with Roberto Mancini. So, yeah, they're my top five. But it's definitely an interesting week which we've had in terms of how much has certainly cropped up, and it's going to be interesting as to whether what crops up between now and next week, whether there's going to be some more appointments and how that looks, how the squads look for the Euros. I think it's going to crop up in a conversation, especially how that looks. But there's plenty more of discussion and topics that are had to be had. But we looked at Ange Postecoglou and his fragile comments at Spurs and how we touched upon how his season has looked and his outlook towards next year and his mindset. We've looked at Atalanta's 3-0 European Cup win. We've looked at Marco Rose's goal and leaving Dortmund and just a short touching segment on him. We've looked at De Zerbi leaving Brighton and whether that was a shock and wherever his next destination is going to be. Thiago Motta to Juve, again, is that a risk factor and the potential in him and the season he's had at Bognor? The arrival of Julian Lopetegui and whether he's going to transition from Moyes and take West Ham to the next level. Company to buy in another risk factor, or as to whether it is a bad move or a good move, and that's going to be an interesting one to continue to analyse as that unfolds. Pochettino leaving Chelsea, and whether that was a shock or whether that was expected to come, and our thoughts on him as to whether he's been successful, how he's built on the foundations or left foundations for the future, and whether sixth place in Europe was a good comeback from where he was sat in 10th 11th, and the job he's done. We've looked at Chelsea managerial candidates and who might step up, who Chelsea might consider, who perhaps isn't ready, and how that looks. We've looked at Jurgen Klopp leaving Liverpool and just touching upon Arne Slot again. We've just touched upon Hansi Flick to Barcelona. We've looked at some championship elements as well, and we've discussed our future potential candidates for Man City. So it's definitely been so much content to cover, and what has continued to build on a fantastic conversation, and is really, again, as always, we could sit here for many hours and add so much more content. But I think in terms of our weekly digest, just to digest some of these segments from the week and what has unfolded, and perhaps our outlook towards next week, I think this has been another fantastic episode, especially for a second episode building upon last week, joined by Jordan and what he's bringing to the table as a Spurs fan, and as to whether he's going to be crying his heart out next year or whether he's going to be crying his eyes out. So that's definitely one to consider over the next few weeks.
I think it might be for latter for way the years have gone, mate.
It could be for sure, but in between that, as a fan from England in terms of Jordan and me from Wales, and a very controversial view here, I do support England in the national teams as well. So it's going to be an interesting time for both of us as to whether England perform. But that is an upcoming episode, which I'm looking forward to having that discussion with you, and then the potential future of Gareth Southgate and the next England manager, which is going to come up in the next few weeks. But George, it's been a pleasure to chat with you again tonight, and thank you very much for making this happen and bringing your thoughts, knowledge, analysis, and criticality to the table.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great coming on again tonight, and yeah, we've definitely got through a lot, haven't we, mate?
Absolutely, we have. It's definitely an interesting week to go, but it's always a pleasure, and it's great to see you again. But looking forward to seeing you next week once again, which I can't wait for.
Lovely. Look forward to it as well, Luca.
Likewise. Well, take care, mate. Have a great rest of the evening and week, and I'll catch up with you shortly.
Thank you, mate, and you.
Cheers, mate. Bye.